Hey, good morning, Atlantia. This is a little different and something that I've never done before, so I hope you do forgive me. But I wanted to do a short video today for my portion of Today in History. We have talked about this individual before, and I'm super excited that I get to talk about her again. And earlier this month, we discussed her on August 7th. It's so funny, like my Why So Serious poster behind me here. We talked about her on August 7th, and it was her birthday. Now, this particular individual starts out in SCA period because she was born in 1570, and obviously people don't die at the end of the SCA period, so she does pass away outside of period, but why wouldn't we talk about her anyways? The person that we're talking about is Elizabeth Bathory, and she is one of the most mysterious, or at least interesting characters in a late 16th century period. And she, obviously, like we talked about before, or I wrote about, she was born August 7th, and she was born at the Adelhait family home, which is the Bathory family seat. Now, what we're talking about, though, today is a little darker, but not the darkest piece of Elizabeth Bathory, which is her death. And now we're not going to get into the dark piece about her, but eventually on a very special day in history, we will. Now, legend has it, and I think a lot of us know this legend about her, that Elizabeth Bathory was entombed in a cell that after her trial she was put in and left there for the rest of her life. Now, pieces of that are absolutely true. First, off the bat, Elizabeth Bathory did not have a trial. She was not convicted of anything, and instead what she got was to be entombed for the rest of her life, which was not a crime because they did not kill her. It would have been a crime if the royalty at the time, who was King Matthias of Hungary, who would eventually become Emperor, Holy Roman Emperor Matthias, if they would have killed her, they being King Matthias, and Matthias's right-hand man, Palatine Count Gregory Thorso. Now, we're going to talk a second about Gregory Thorso. He is probably not a good guy in history. A lot of Hungarians are not considered the best individuals, and obviously it is the medieval times, so perhaps good guys and bad guys are relative. Gregory Thorso was the best friend of Elizabeth Bathory's husband, Fenrins, and Fenrins was considered a hero of Hungary and called their Black Knight. Now, Fenrins and Elizabeth had a ton of money, and, you know, Fenrins being a war hero and a very, very good general, he would fight the Ottoman Turks, specifically Suleiman the Magnificent, and when he would come back from war, which was extremely often, more often than he was actually at home with Elizabeth, he would come back with war booty, war bounty, and it only elevated their wealth and their status. So when Fenrins died, Elizabeth was probably one of the that's not exactly the right word, was probably one of the richest women, if not the richest woman in Western Europe. She had so many lands given to her just by her parents when she inherited their lands, but with Fenrins, she had even more. Upon their wedding, he gave her a castle, and this castle is very important. That castle is Castle Countess, and that is where we're at right now in December of 1611. Now, Elizabeth is in this castle, and she is being, as everyone knows, entombed. There is no question that Elizabeth was entombed. The only question is, where was it actually at Almost all evidence and letters indicate that it was at Castle Countess, but no actual official governmental documents say that it was Castle Countess that she was entombed into. Now, the other piece of this that nobody is exactly certain about, and that is if you go visit Castle Countess to this day, there is a small window, and you can probably Google search this fairly easily. There is a small window that sits in a tower of Castle Countess, and that is, and I'm saying this as German as I can, there are a million different pronunciations based on what country that you're in for this castle, and its name has changed over the centuries. So bear with me, let's not get too caught up in the actual pronunciation of it. So Castle Countess has a window. And the window, if you look at it now modernly, it looks like it's looking out onto open land. That is probably not true. It's probably not the window, even though I think local ghost hunters and tour guides tell you that that's what it is. No one knows what actual tower or room that Elizabeth was put into. Now, what we do know for a fact, when she was entombed, there was a small window left, so necessities such as water, food, probably toiletries, could be passed through this window, and excrement, so she could change out her bathroom bucket. She did not have the best life in there. Now, she didn't have a peasant's life entombed, but she was allowed a rotating staff of 3 to 5 attendants. They're not exactly certain how many, but she was only allowed one every half day. So they basically rotated, I guess, shifts to be there with her. And a lot of those attendants actually documented her throughout the day because also her caretaker in that palace was a relative of Gregory Thorso, and he Stanislav Thurso is his name, actually. And he was sort of the overkeeper of her, the overseer, to ensure that she was taken care of and that she got what she needed. Now, we talked about that she was not put to death for the crimes that she did commit. However, that is only because you could not kill a noblewoman. And Elizabeth was probably one of, like I said, one of the wealthiest women in Europe, which led to a different issue. And that was that she had enough money that Matthias wanted some of that money. So if she passed away without death, he would get 10% of her lands and her wealth. And also, some of that was promised to Gregory Thorso. So it was in their best interest not to cause a nobility uprising after killing a noble for essentially doing what she was allowed to do with people she owned, because peasants class were owned individuals, they were a slave class, and she had every right, at least in that period, to treat and maintain them as she saw fit. So now it's they're on a waiting game, basically waiting for her to pass away. Elizabeth, however, was extremely smart, and she knew the laws and she knew the rules of the kingdom, and as customs, she followed them to a T. So, July 31st of 1614, we know for a fact it was this date, she called a lawyer to the Countess Castle to write her final will and testament. And she she had 3 children. Her only son was Paul Nasati, and she had 2 daughters, and she really hated the daughters' husbands. And so she wrote a will that gave Paul most of her lands and most of her wealth, but she did leave that also to some of that to her daughters. But in the will, she specified that none of that wealth and that land was to go to either of the daughter's husbands. So she really just did not like her son-in-laws. So we know that she did that. We know that she had the wherewithal in August 1614 to make sure that she did everything she could to try to protect her heirs' rights. Now, that probably didn't happen, and we do know what happened, but that is again for another day. However, it was August 21st, that's today, when Elizabeth passed away. That morning, She complained that her hands were cold and that she felt really tired. And her attendant that day said, you know what, just lay down and take a break. You're probably just feeling the weather. It's cold. She laid down, she put a pillow between her legs, and she began to sing a hymn. And as she fell asleep, the attendant left her be, came back to check on her, and Erzsébet had at some time in that space that span of time, rather, she did pass away. Here is the sort of fun piece to the end of Erzsébet and her death. So no one actually knows where the body of Erzsébet Bathory is entombed. Now, we know that she had a funeral and that people did attend, but there's several different things that may or may not have happened concerning her body. One, she was either put in the crypt at Countess or she was put in the church cemetery. Now, records indicate that she was buried in the church cemetery, but there is no grave in the church cemetery that states it's Erzsébet Bathory. That could be several different things, one of which is likely that peasantry and even maybe nobility said, hey, we can't have somebody with her life history, basically a monster, being buried in such a holy piece of land, which would be the Countess church graveyard. So it is likely that her son, Paul was told that he must take her body. And there is rumor and even indication that he did do that he had her removed from the cemetery and then her body moved to the crypt of the Acide family estate, which is the Bathory family estate. But there's a little problem with that. They can't find a body or a grave that is missing at all in that cemetery either, or in the crypts there. So no one knows to this day where Erzsébet Bathory is buried. A little interesting tidbit is recently I read an article that a group of historians have went back to Castle Countess, and they actually went to the churchyard where they believed, or the church rather, where they believed that Erzsébet would have went to church and oversaw that church. In there, they took cameras that they put in tubes and they drilled holes in various locations that they used sonography to try to find possibly where Erzsébet is buried at. They did find a very interesting grave, which was buried under the church altar, which would be indicative that that person was extremely important to that village and that they were very wealthy. They don't know who that body is. There's indication through the sonography that possibly it is the size of a woman, but they cannot make it out 100%. So I really am interested if one day they could do DNA testing or deter her and find, I think that's the right word, if they could find that it actually is Erzsébet and that mystery we put to bed. So thank you for bearing with me on this very first and maybe not so clean version, or my version of Today in History. And I look forward to maybe doing another one of these in the future. And I hope it was informative, and I look forward to seeing you later.